Urgent! Order for French citizens to leave Burkina Faso within 24 hours. Send troops to punish President Traoré. Ouagadougou, 6:00 a.m. French state television cuts into its regular programming with a chilling announcement. All French nationals in Burkina Faso must evacuate the country within 24 hours, no exceptions. On the surface, it seems like a routine advisory. But between the lines, this is a geopolitical earthquake. For the first time in the 21st century, France is signaling that direct military intervention in Africa is not off the table. Not in theory, but in execution. This crisis did not erupt overnight. The tension between Paris and Burkina Faso's military ruler, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has been simmering for months, even years. But now, that friction has ignited into a full-blown standoff, one that combines ideological warfare, proxy conflict, and the very real specter of boots on the ground. Just a few years ago, Burkina Faso was one of France's most important partners in West Africa. As part of Operation Barkhane, French troops were stationed across the Sahel to counter jihadist insurgencies. Bases were established, intelligence was shared, and France portrayed itself as a defender of regional stability. That changed on September 30, 2022. A military coup swept away then-leader Lieutenant Colonel Damiba. In his place rose Ibrahim Traoré, a young, charismatic officer with a radical vision. Decolonization is not symbolic. It must be total. From day one, Traoré launched a scorched earth policy against French influence. French special forces were expelled from the country. State media outlets, like Radio France Internationale, RFI, were banned. All military cooperation agreements with Paris were revoked. And most notably, Traoré began welcoming Russian advisors and Wagner paramilitaries into his inner circle. To France, this was not just a shift in foreign policy, it was a betrayal, and a dangerous one. The once cooperative Ouagadougou had now turned into a defiant capital echoing anti-French slogans, pan-African calls for sovereignty, and veiled threats of resistance. On the morning of June 19th, the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs released a Level 4 emergency directive, the highest classification for international threats. The language was cold, clinical, but unmistakably clear. Due to a rapidly deteriorating security situation and the increased risk of state-sanctioned violence, all French nationals in Burkina Faso are instructed to evacuate within 24 hours. Behind the scenes, the move sent shockwaves through the diplomatic community. This was not just a travel advisory. This was a warning shot, a signal that France was preparing for something far more serious than diplomatic protest. In Ouagadougou, panic rippled through embassies and expat communities. French families scrambled to get on the few remaining commercial flights, while military aircraft began touching down in neighboring Ivory Coast and Niger. Unmarked jets, loaded with tactical gear and personnel, were spotted refueling at French bases in Dakar and Abidjan. Even before any official announcement of military action, French intelligence agents, some embedded, others recalled months earlier, began compiling a list of strategic targets inside Burkina Faso, communications hubs near the capital, weapon caches reportedly guarded by Wagner-affiliated forces, training camps in the northern provinces. The message from Paris was not subtle. Traoré had crossed a line, and France was now preparing to respond. What triggered this sudden escalation? According to high-level sources, two factors played a decisive role. The recent detention of 4 French nationals accused of espionage sparked outrage in the Élysée Palace. While Traoré's government claimed they were covert agents, France denied all charges and called the arrests an act of diplomatic aggression. A leaked internal video, allegedly recorded during a closed-door cabinet meeting in Burkina Faso, showed Traoré mocking French foreign policy and vowing, "We will bury the French presence in Africa once and for all." The clip went viral across Francophone Africa and deeply embarrassed the Macron administration. Now, faced with public humiliation and waning influence in the region, Paris is no longer content with quiet diplomacy. The countdown has begun. By 10:00 p.m. Paris time, multiple military assets began moving into place. Officially, France denied any operation was underway. Unofficially, everything pointed to one chilling reality: a limited but decisive military strike was imminent. Sources inside the French Defense Ministry revealed the skeleton of what they are calling a special stabilization framework, a rapid response doctrine designed to neutralize hostile regimes in former French territories without full-scale occupation. Burkina Faso, under Captain Ibrahim Traoré, had now been categorized as a Level 3 threat to regional French interests. In simple terms, hostile, unstable, and uncooperative. The operation plan, codename Sable Noir, Black Sand. The operation would consist of 3 coordinated phases. Phase 1, Blind and Jam. French military satellites repositioned over Burkina Faso to intercept and jam communications between Ouagadougou and northern garrisons. Cyber units based in Paris and Djibouti launched preemptive strikes to disrupt Traoré's military command network, targeting his government's encrypted channels. All outgoing data from the Ministry of Defense in Burkina Faso went dark within hours. Phase 2, Strike and Neutralize. 2 Rafale fighter squadrons stationed in Niamey, Niger, and Gao, Mali, were put on alert. Intelligence suggested Traoré and his elite circle were holding strategy meetings at a secure location outside Ouagadougou. French drones circled overhead, while commandos from the Point de Régiment de Parachutistes d'Infanterie de Marine, 1st Marine Paratrooper Regiment, were deployed to nearby drop zones. Simultaneously, armored vehicles, entraîneurs, and heavy artillery were mobilized from Ivory Coast and Senegal, converging along the southern border. Phase 3, Decapitate and Contain. If Phase 2 failed to force surrender, Phase 3 authorized the capture or elimination of key figures in Traoré's inner circle. Burkinabe military units loyal to Traoré were to be disarmed or isolated. The objective: neutralize the chain of command without civilian casualties or prolonged ground conflict. Back in Paris, President Emmanuel Macron chaired an emergency National Security Council meeting. According to leaks, he asked one chilling question: can we remove Traoré in 72 hours without starting another colonial war? French officials knew the optics were risky. Another intervention in Africa would ignite backlash across the continent. But from their perspective, the alternative, letting a pro-Russian junta fester in the heart of West Africa, was worse. The gears of war were turning, quietly, efficiently, and with surgical precision. Shall we continue with Part 4? Traoré fights back. The people rise and the nation arms itself? This next section will show how Traoré responds, mobilizes national sentiment, and turns the invasion into a moral war. Ready to proceed? While French troops and warplanes quietly positioned themselves along Burkina Faso's borders, Captain Ibrahim Traoré was not hiding. At exactly midnight local time, the national broadcast system went live. Traoré, dressed in full combat fatigues, appeared in a dimly lit war room, flanked by military officers and civilian advisors. His voice was calm, but the message was thunderous. This is not a war between armies. This is a war between sovereignty and subjugation. We will not kneel. We will not be recolonized. Within hours, Traoré declared a national emergency and signed Executive Decree 88, mobilizing all eligible civilians into regional militias. Rural villages began forming self-defense groups, trained by ex-military personnel loyal to the junta. In urban centers like Bobo Dioulasso and Ouagadougou, thousands took to the streets with homemade signs reading, "Down with France, long live a free Africa." The People's Defense Doctrine was born. Traoré unveiled a three-tier defense system that blurred the line between civilian and military resistance. Militia mobilization zones, over 50 popular resistance units were established, using schools, mosques, and town halls as operating bases. Makeshift roadblocks were erected on all highways leading to major cities. Digital Battlefield, a coordinated social media campaign, flooded Twitter, TikTok, and Telegram with videos of young Burkinabe pledging to die for independence. Deepfake footage of Traoré meeting with Russian military advisors began circulating, its authenticity unconfirmed, but its psychological impact undeniable. Foreign alliance appeal. Traoré formally invoked Article 3 of the Sahel Solidarity Pact and called upon Mali, Niger, and Guinea to stand with Burkina Faso. He also reached out to Russia, Iran, and Turkey, requesting anti-air defense systems, drone jamming kits, and fuel for extended ground resistance. Burkina Faso's military was outgunned, but it would not be caught unprepared. If France planned a clean surgical strike, Traoré was preparing to turn it into a street-by-street, village-by-village insurgency. The Western media labeled it irrational nationalism, but across the African continent, Traoré's defiance began to resonate as something else entirely. A new Patrice Lumumba, reborn in the digital age. The international community did not stay silent. Within 24 hours of France's evacuation order and military buildup, global reactions erupted, revealing not just concern over Burkina Faso, but the emergence of a new geopolitical front line. In a rare late-night press briefing, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov issued a pointed statement. Any unilateral military action in Burkina Faso would be considered a violation of international sovereignty and an affront to African self-determination. The message was more than rhetoric. Russian cargo planes were seen landing in Bamako, Mali, reportedly offloading radar jamming systems and short-range missile batteries. Wagner-linked social media channels began celebrating Traoré as a pan-African hero, comparing him to anti-colonial leaders like Thomas Sankara and Gamal Abdel Nasser. Russia and China accused Paris of neo-imperialist aggression. African representatives were split, some backing Traoré, others fearful of regional collapse. Meanwhile, the African Union remained disturbingly quiet. What became increasingly clear was this: Burkina Faso was no longer just a national crisis. It had become the centerpiece of a global chessboard. On one side stood France, clinging to influence in a region it once ruled. On the other stood Russia, and perhaps even China, ready to exploit any French misstep to reshape Africa's power structure. This was no longer diplomacy. This was proxy warfare wrapped in sovereignty discourse, and the battlefield was widening. Let us step into the nightmare scenario, one that now feels more possible than ever. France launches Operation Sable Noir. The Rafale jets take off. French commandos cross the border under cover of night. Their mission: decapitate Traoré's leadership, disable key military sites, and restore order before the world can react. But Burkina Faso does not collapse. Instead, it erupts. Scenario A: Burkina fights back. Region engulfed Mali, Niger, and Guinea activate mutual defense protocols. Wagner paramilitaries embedded in the region launch counter-raids against French outposts. Urban warfare consumes Ouagadougou, turning the capital into a war zone reminiscent of Fallujah or Aleppo. Civilian casualties climb into the thousands, triggering a humanitarian catastrophe. Refugees pour across borders, destabilizing Ghana, Togo, and Ivory Coast. The Sahel becomes a magnet for foreign fighters, extremists, and black market arms dealers. What started as a precision strike becomes a full-blown regional war. Scenario B: France wins the battle, loses the continent. Traoré is captured, or worse, killed. A pro-French interim government is installed within 96 hours. But the African public sees it for what it is: regime change by a former colonizer. Anti-French protests erupt across Senegal, Chad, Cameroon, even reaching into North Africa. French businesses are boycotted. Embassies are attacked. French influence collapses. Paris may have removed one man, but it wakes a Pan-African resistance movement that could last for generations. Scenario C: Cold War. Reloaded. Africa as the new front. Russia deepens military cooperation with anti-West regimes across the continent. China quietly supports infrastructure projects in these same regions, offering stability as a counter-narrative to the West's chaos. The African continent splits, not along borders, but along ideology. West-leaning democracies versus East-leaning strongmen. The Sahel becomes the new Berlin Wall, invisible but undeniable. And all of it began with one 24-hour ultimatum. Whether Traoré survives this crisis or not, his name is already etched into history. For some, he is a dangerous populist playing with fire. For others, he is the first truly post-colonial African leader to challenge the West on its own terms. In the field, online, and in the hearts of millions. And for France, if it fires the first shot, it may win the war on paper, but it risks losing the soul of Africa forever.